Hello and welcome to the old Fliers. Chinese military general and strategist Sun Tzu said, "Know the strengths and weaknesses of an enemy's weapons in order to defeat them." In 1942, German pilot Hauptmann Armin Faber became disorientated and mistakenly landed his Focke-Wulf 190A3 at RAF Pembrey in Wales. This gave the British an intact FW-190, which gave valuable intelligence. During the Korean War, the Americans offered $100,000 to any North Korean pilot who defected and brought with them a MiG-15. No Kum-sok obliged, and so the US was able to examine and exploit the weaknesses of this aircraft. Author Jim Reardon has written about a fortuitous event in the Pacific theatre of World War II when a Japanese Mitsubishi Zero was delivered into the hands of American engineers and pilots. 5 months after America's entry into the war, the Zero was still a mystery to US Navy pilots. It was even misidentified as the German Messerschmitt 109. The Zero was formidable. In April 1942, 36 Zeros attacked a British naval base at Colombo, Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, and were met by 60 RAF aircraft, 15 Hawker Hurricanes, 8 Fairey Swordfish and 4 Fairey Fulmars went down. The Japanese lost 1 Zero. A few weeks later, on June 4th, Zeros from the Japanese carriers Ryuyo and Yanyo attacked the American military base at Dutch Harbour in Alaska's Aleutian Archipelago. One of those pilots was Flight Petty Officer Koga. His late model Zero, serial number 4593, was light grey with the Imperial Rising Sun insignia on its wings and fuselage. Koga's Zero was hit by ground fire. A bullet severed the return oil line between the oil cooler and the engine. Koga made for Akuktan Island, 25 miles away, which had been designated for emergency landings. A Japanese submarine stood ready to pick up downed pilots. Koga lowered his wheels and flaps. As his main wheels touched, they dug in and the Zero flipped onto its back. The valley floor was a bog and knee-high grass concealed water. Koga's 2 fellow Zero pilots circled above but found no sign of life. Their duty was to destroy the downed Zero, but they refused to strafe the wreck with incendiary bullets for fear that Koga was still alive. Perhaps he would recover, destroy the plane himself, and be rescued by the waiting submarine. The wrecked Zero lay in the bog for more than a month, unseen by US patrol planes and offshore ships. On July 10, a US Navy Catalina amphibian returning from overnight patrols crossed the island. A gunner spotted the aircraft in the bog. The Catalina's commander, Lieutenant William Thies, descended for a closer look. Back at Dutch Harbour, Thies persuaded his squadron commander to let him take a party to the downed plane. No one then knew that it was a Zero. Ensign Robert Larson, Thies's co-pilot, remembered reaching the Zero. He said, "We approached cautiously, walking in about a foot of water covered with grass. Koga's body was upside down in the plane. We were surprised at the details of the airplane. It was well built with simple, unique features. Inspection plates could be opened by pushing on a black dot with a finger. A latch would open and one could pull the plate out. Wingtips folded by unlatching them and pushing them up by hand. The pilot had a parachute and a life raft." End of quote. Thies determined that the wrecked plane was a nearly new Zero and it was repairable. Unlike US warplanes, which had detachable wings, the Zero's wings were integral with the fuselage. This complicated salvage and shipping. Navy crews brought the plane out of the bog. The tripod that was used to lift the engine and then the fuselage sank into the mud. The Zero was left upside down while a tractor dragged it on a skid to the beach and then loaded to a barge. At Dutch Harbour, it was turned over with a crane, clean and crated, wings and all. When 04593 arrived at North Island Naval Air Station, San Diego, a 12-foot-high stockade was erected round it inside a hangar. Marines guarded the priceless plane while Navy crews worked around the clock to make it airworthy. In September 1942, Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders studied it for a week as repairs were completed. Sanders said, "My log shows that I made 24 flights in 04593 from 20 September to 15 October 1942. These flights covered performance tests such as we do on planes undergoing Navy tests. The very first flight exposed weaknesses of the Zero that our pilots could exploit with proper tactics. The Zero had superior maneuverability at the lower speeds in dogfighting with short turning radius and excellent aileron control at very low speeds. Apparent was the fact that the ailerons froze up at speeds above 200 knots, so that rolling manoeuvres at those speeds were slow and required much force on the control stick. It rolled to the left much easier than to the right. Also, its engine cut out when nosing into a dive due to its float-type carburetor." We now had an answer for our pilots who were unable to escape a pursuing Zero. We told them to go into a vertical power dive if possible to open the range quickly and gain advantageous speed while the Zero's engine was stalled. At about 200 knots, we instructed them to roll hard right before the Zero pilot could get his sights lined up. This recommended tactic was radioed to the fleet after my first flight of Koga's plane, and soon the welcome answer came back, "It works!" End of quote. By late September 1942, Allied pilots in the Pacific Theatre knew how to escape a pursuing Zero. The Navy pitted it against the best American fighters of the time, the P-38 Lockheed Lightning, the P-39 Bell Era Cobra, the P-51 North American Mustang, the F-4F4 Grumman Wildcat, and the F-4U Chance Voigt Corsair, and for each type developed the most effective tactics and altitudes for engaging the Zero. In February 1945, Commander Richard G. Crommelin was taxiing 04593 at San Diego Naval Air Station, where it was being used to train pilots bound for the Pacific War Zone. An SB-2C Curtiss Helldiver overran it and chopped it up from tail to cockpit. Crommelin survived, but the Zero didn't. Bits of it were donated to the National Museum of the United States Navy and the Alaska Aviation Heritage Museum in Anchorage. A classic example of the Koga's plane valued occurred on April 1, 1943, when Ken Walsh, a Marine flying an F-4U Chance Voigt Corsair over the Russell Islands southeast of Bougainville, encountered a lone Zero. He said, "I turned towards him, planning a deflection shot, but before I could get on him, he rolled, putting his plane right under my tail and within range. I had been told the Zero was extremely maneuverable, but if I hadn't seen how swiftly his plane flipped onto my tail, I wouldn't have believed it." I remember briefings that resulted from test flights of Koga's Zero on how to escape from a following Zero. With that lone Zero on my tail, I did a split S, and with its nose down and full throttle, my Corsair picked up speed fast. I wanted at least 240 to 260 knots. Then, as prescribed, I rolled hard right. As I did this and continued my dive, traces from the Zero zinged past my plane's belly. If I hadn't known which way to turn or roll, I'd have probably rolled to my left. If I had done that, the Zero would likely have turned with me, locked on, and had me. I used that maneuver a number of times to get away from Zeros. End of quote. By war's end, Captain Kenneth Walsh had 21 aerial victories, including 17 Zeros, making him the war's 4th ranking Marine Corps ace. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for 2 extremely courageous air battles he fought over the Solomon Islands in the Corsair during August 1943. How important was the acquisition of Koga Zero? Masatake Okumiya, who survived more air-sea battles than any other Japanese naval officer, wrote that the Allies' acquisition of Koga Zero was no less serious than the Japanese defeat at Midway and did much to hasten our final defeat. The Zero was Japan's main fighter plane throughout World War II. About 11,500 Zeros were produced in 5 main variants. In March 1939, when the prototype Zero was rolled out, Japan was in some ways still so backward that the plane had to be hauled by ox cart from the Mitsubishi factory 29 miles to the airfield where it flew. It represented a great leap in technology. At the start of World War II, some countries' fighters were open cockpit, fabric covered biplanes. A low-wing, all-metal monoplane carrier fighter, predecessor to the Zero, had been adopted by the Japanese in the mid-1930s, while the US Navy's Standard Fighter was still a biplane. The world took little notice of Japan's advanced military aircraft, so the Zero came as a great shock to Americans at Pearl Harbor and afterwards. A combination of nimbleness and simplicity gave it fighting qualities that no Allied plane could match. Lightness, simplicity, ease of maintenance, sensitivity to controls, and extreme maneuverability were the main elements that the designer Horikoshi built into the Zero. The Model 21, flown by Koga, weighed 5,500 pounds, including fuel, ammunition and pilot, while US fighters weighed 7,500 pounds and up. Early Zeros had no protective armour or self-sealing fuel tanks, although these were standard features on US fighters. Despite its large diameter 940 horsepower radial engine, the Zero had one of the slimmest silhouettes of any World War II fighter. The maximum speed of Koga's Zero was 326 miles per hour at 16,000 feet, not especially fast for a 1942 fighter. But high speed wasn't the reason for the Zero's great combat record. Agility was. Its large ailerons gave it great manoeuvrability at low speeds. It could even outmaneuver the British Spitfire. Advanced US fighters produced towards the war end still couldn't turn with the Zero, but they were faster and could outclimb and outdive it. Without self-sealing fuel tanks, the Zero was easily flamed when hit in any of the 3 wing or fuselage tanks or its droppable belly tank. Without protective armour, its pilot was vulnerable. In 1941, the Zero's range of 1,675 nautical miles was one of the wonders of the aviation world. No other fighter plane had ever routinely flown such a distance. Saburo Sakai, Japan's highest scoring surviving World War II ace with 64 kills, believes that if the Zero had not been developed, Japan would not have decided to start the war. Other Japanese authorities echo this opinion, and the confidence it reflects was not, in the beginning at least, misplaced. Today the Zero is one of the rarest of all major fighter planes of World War II. Only 16 complete and assembled examples are known to exist. Of these, only 2 are flyable, one owned by Planes of Fame in Chino, California, and the other by the Confederate Air Force in Midland, Texas. Thank you for watching. Please support our channel by donation, liking, and subscribing.